Hello, this is a video on dialogue for the Executive Master in Collective Intelligence. In this video, we're going to look at a few of the core concepts from the tradition of dialogue, most notably taught by the physicist David Bohm and William Isaacs, professor at MIT, as well as influenced by the practice of several friends and guest lecturers at the School of Collective Intelligence. We're going to begin by introducing you to David Bohm, who was born in Pennsylvania in 1917 to Hungarian parents, who, from a very modest background, showed an incredible aptitude for physics and mathematics, and studied under Robert Oppenheimer, considered the father of the atomic bomb, at University of California, Berkeley. David Bohm, as a young man, was horrified by the World War that he had lived through as a very young child, and he was attracted to pacifist movements, workers' movements, and these quote-unquote left-wing associations of David Bohm, even though he was primarily a student and a physicist, caused him to be excluded from the Manhattan Project, although his doctoral research was used as part of that project to develop the atomic bomb. He worked notably in the field of plasma and developed in the 1950s a theory called hidden variables, which I'm nowhere near qualified enough to discuss, but he made a number of important contributions to theoretical physics over the course of the 50s and 60s. He abandoned his initial adherence to or attraction to Marxism after the Hungarian uprising and suppressed by Soviet Union. And in the 1960s and 70s begins writing and thinking about and connecting his work in physics to his thoughts about society and how we could make a more peaceful, less conflictual society. And his last part of his life was spent writing several important works for the field of dialogue and facilitation, as well as works of metaphysics and philosophy, including the work Wholeness and the Implicate Order, in which he makes a connection between how we think and what quantum physics has taught us about the nature of reality and how the universe is made. This worldview we call quantum physics replaced a worldview that had dominated Western science for several hundred years. Really, two of the fathers of the modern scientific revolution, Isaac Newton and René Descartes, agreed on a couple of important principles: that science shouldn't merely follow the statements of authority figures like Aristotle, that science should be based on observation, and that each generation could challenge and overturn the doctrines of the generation before. But both Newton and Descartes had views about the universe that were very particular to the European tradition. Descartes postulated a complete separation between the mind and the physical world. This was, some argue, a way of protecting the claims of science from the claims of religion, which talked about immaterial souls, and Descartes, as a Christian, wanted to separate these two domains. Isaac Newton, for his part, developed what we call the laws of classical mechanics, describing how bodies move under the influence of forces like gravity. And the mental model of the universe that resulted was a model we could call the billiard ball universe, of small objects colliding or attracting or repelling one another. That the universe is made up of these small, discrete, separate objects that can revolve around each other or push and pull each other. And this was the view of the universe that was dominant in Western universities at the time that David Bohm was born in the very early years of the 20th century. And it was in these first decades of the 20th century that Newtonian Cartesian view of the universe received several very important challenges by scientists like Max Planck, who had described energy as composed of tiny particles. And this is empirical work that gave rise to his theory of quanta. Of course, this was a time where scientists were able to make much more refined observations of the world than they had in the time of Isaac Newton. And 1905 is known, among other things, as a great memorable leap forward in science called the Annus Mirabilis. Einstein publishes 4 papers, each of which revolutionized some important understanding of physics in the world, including his theory of special relativity. Quick on the heels of Einstein's work was a Danish physicist, Niels Bohr, who wins the Nobel Prize in 1922 for developing a picture of atomic structure that integrated Max Planck's work. 1927, Heisenberg publishes what became known as his uncertainty principle, based on the duality that light is both a wave and a particle, which led to intense debates between Einstein and Niels Bohr. And these men, who had initially a huge respect for one another, ultimately fell out after their time working together on the atomic energy project in the 1940s. Einstein's large-scale view of relativity and the universe and things like black holes came into conflict with the microscopic theories of Niels Bohr on how particles interact. Rainey and Wellman, their book Networked, the New Social Operating System, describe it this way. Atoms once were pictured as mini solar systems, electrons circling a nucleus of protons and neutrons. In the influential shift by scientists towards thinking in networks, quantum physics, the very properties of parts are defined by the interactions among them. We now picture atoms not as these little collections of balls circling one another, but as complex interactions among a variety of particles bonding together and connecting to others. Niels Bohr put it this way. With this revolution in quantum physics, everything we call real, we see to be made up of things that cannot be regarded as real. The further you push into the building blocks of reality, the stranger the world seems. David Bohm, as a young physicist, was known to Einstein, and they corresponded. And one of the inspirations of David Bohm in thinking about dialogue was watching how some of the greatest minds in his field, in the field of physics, became unable to communicate. And toward the end of their lives, Einstein and Bohr completely fell out with one another, and this was considered by Bohm to be a great failure. If these two humane, intelligent men and their followers could no longer have a common conversation. And so we looked at Bohm's essays, some of his seminal essays on dialogue. And so the first concept that I want to introduce is Bohm's notion of participatory thought, the kind of thinking that our ancestors may have practiced, but that in the world of Isaac Newton and René Descartes, Western societies lost the ability, the capacity. So Bohm puts it this way. In early human cultures, and to some extent even now, there has existed what has been called participatory thought. People in such cultures felt that they were participating in some of the things that they saw, that everything in the world was participating, and that the spirit of things was all one. And he uses the word participation. He notes that it has a double meaning, that to participate means to partake, that you are eating from a common bowl, that you are taking something from this common reality, and also taking part in. To participate means to make your own individual contributions. So dialogue for David Bohm is based on this double idea of participation, of everyone gaining something and everyone giving something. He continues, 500,000 years ago, people didn't really need much literal thought. They lived in small groups of hunter-gatherers. They all knew one another and developed literal thought only for simple technical purposes. But then came the agricultural revolution, and larger societies developed. These societies needed much more organization and order and technology. They began, therefore, to treat everything as a separate object, including other people. Consider the organization of any sort of contemporary bureaucracy or hierarchy. In such an organization, Bohm continues, people are treated as objects. They have to do this and this and this and be treated in that way. Literal thought knows a person by his function. He is what you call him, a worker, a banker, an engineer, an HR specialist. And this way of talking and thinking sets up a social hierarchy in which people become isolated from each other, and their participation in some common form of thinking is very limited. And as Joe Henrich might put it, this is weird. Weird both in the sense of strange, given our desire, a natural human desire to belong and participate, that we function in organizations that separate and fragment us, but weird also in the sense of something born in Western culture and in a specifically Protestant Western culture, the culture of Northwestern Europe that was the main contributor to the culture of America. Weird, meaning Western, educated, industrial, rich, and democratic. That this is not how all humans think, but it's one common way of thinking that comes from the way companies are organized today. In such a view, the world is made of objects, literally. We treat other people as objects, and eventually that means you treat yourself as an object, saying, I must fit in here, I must do this or that, and become better. But, David Bohm reminds us, society is not an objective reality. It's not something out there like a mountain or a tree. It's a reality created by all the people through their consciousness. And this reminds us of something we've seen earlier in the Master, the works of Michael Tomasello in his book, Becoming Human. He's a psychologist who conducts experiments on chimpanzees and other great apes, and also on humans, especially young humans, to see how other members of the primate family approach things like collaboration, communication. And so in his book, Becoming Human, a theory of ontogeny meaning how human beings develop over time, Tomasello puts it this way: great apes engage in basic processes of perception, memory, and categorization, as well as more complex processes of intentional communication, pro-social behavior, and social learning. Humans' abilities to cooperate with one another take unique forms because, unlike other primates, humans are able to create with one another a shared agent, a shared actor, we. We do this, we do that, operating with shared intentions, shared knowledge, and shared socio-moral values. And the claim is that these abilities emerged first in human evolution between collaborative partners operating dyadically, meaning in pairs, a binôme, pairs of two, in acts of what Tomasello calls joint intentionality. And then later among individuals as members of groups, of cultural groups, in acts of what he calls collective intentionality. So as Tomasello puts it, society is, like David Bohm says, a product of collective intentionality, that our earliest ancestors, that we have in common with other great apes that we diverged from around 5 million years ago. Well, we don't have any direct evidence of how they lived and interacted, but we can make some inferences based on how our closest genetic cousins act today. And the way Tomasello puts it, quoting from his book, chimpanzees can be very smart. In fact, they are smarter in some ways than humans in game theory tasks and game playing. Chimpanzees can, and short-term memory, can outperform humans in some tasks. Tomasello, and I quote, they say, they possess complex skills of cognition and social cognition for understanding, predicting, and manipulating their physical and social worlds. What they do not possess is human-like skills of shared intentionality, such as the ability to participate in the thinking of others through joint attention, conventional communication, and pedagogy. Chimpanzees and bonobos, and thus our last common ancestor, are and were very clever, but mainly or only as individuals. Well, what happened is, Tomasello argues that sometime in between when we divided from our cousins in the primate world and around, let's say, 400 to 150,000 years ago, we developed this ability to create joint action. What he calls joint intentionality has two components. The idea of a shared goal, like we want to go hunt this tiger. Yes, we want to go hunt this tiger, me and you. And the idea of our individual respective contributions. Okay, I'm going to hold the spear, and you're going to go scare the tiger out of the bush, right? And so that each of us know that we are doing something individually that contributes to this joint task. He calls this joint intentionality. And this became something that was not only possible, but obligatory, something that humans required of each other in order to get food, to hunt food, and protect one another. And then as human societies grew from very small scale to societies, tribes of hundreds of people, this is when joint intentionality, the intentionality between me and you, grew to a larger sense of nations, tribes, and ultimately organizations. The idea that we believe in these values, we do things this way, and it allowed each individual to take the perspective of the entire group over their actions. And this is what we do when we work in a company, is that we take the perspective of what the company, how the company is organized, how we play an individual role, and what the company expects of us, of how we're going to play that role and what we need to respect. Jonathan Haidt, the great social psychologist, puts it this way: morality binds and blinds, meaning this same incredible capacity to collaborate can also produce mob behavior, can also cause us to be blind to how other people think. And so this is the challenge which dialogue tries to confront. And so we're going to pick this up in the next video on basic concepts of dialogue.